Welcome, my darlings, to my humble chateau. Please make yourself very comfortable. Relax your mind and release your imagination to me. I will bring you a story to entrance and entertain. Perhaps a frightening one. Perhaps a steampunk. Perhaps a bit of mythology. Anyway, sit back, enjoy, and subscribe to me. Happy Folklore Thursday, my darlings. Today's subject is customs, so naturally I will bring you the best in death customs. We'll start out in the Philippines. Many ethnic groups in the Philippines have unique funeral practices. The Benguet of the northwest Philippines blindfold their dead and place them next to the main entrance of the house. The Tenguin neighbors dress bodies in their very best clothes and have them sit on a chair and even place a lit cigarette in their mouth. The Cavitino, who live near Manila, bury their dead in hollowed-out tree trunks. When someone becomes ill, they select the tree where they will eventually be entombed. And the Apayo, who live in the north, bury their dead under the kitchen. In Australia, the Aboriginal mortuary rites are very interesting also. When a loved one dies, in the Northern Territory, elaborate rituals begin. First, a smoking ceremony is held in the loved one's living area to drive away their spirit. Next, a feast is held with mourners painted ochre as they partake in food and dance. The body is traditionally placed atop a platform and covered in leaves, as it is left to decompose. It has been reported that in some traditions, fluids from the platform can help identify the deceased's killer, which is quite similar to Buddhists in Tibet who participate in sky burials. They believe that the soul leaves the body once a person dies and it is nothing more than an empty vessel. So the body is placed in an exposed place where animals, such as vultures, can consume it. This is an act of generosity on the part of the deceased, allowing the living to benefit from the body once it is no longer needed. It is also practical. Given the cold, rocky terrain, it's very difficult to bury bodies, and wood is scarce, so burning them is also a hardship. Personally, I quite like this idea, being left out in the woods to join whatever animals are out there. The Haida people, of course, like their totem poles in the northwest of the North American continent. But these icons are more than they seem. Normally, the remains of the deceased Haida were thrown into a mass pit where they were scavenged by animals, much like the Tibetans. But if it was a chief or someone important, like a shaman or a warrior, something else was done. The body would be crushed to a pulp with clubs so that it could fit in a small wooden box the size of a suitcase, say. Following that, the box would be placed atop a special mortuary totem pole in front of the deceased longhouse, where the totem poles acted as guardians for the spirit's journey to the afterlife. Many who first encountered the Haida people were quite taken aback, mostly because of the smell. In modern Japan, family members use chopsticks to pick up the bones of their loved ones after cremation and place them in an urn. The foot bones go in first and the head last. This is one of several stages following a wake around the open casket. The deceased is given a Buddhist name and a funeral. Family graves with space for several urns are often what you will find. The funeral industry is very big business in Japan, and a variety of services, modern, can now be offered, including having your loved one's DNA extracted and incorporated into a keepsake, such as a necklace. Of course, many other modern conveniences are also available around the world. In South Korea, a law passed in 2000 requires anyone buried to be removed in 60 years. Several companies have taken this to another level. They will compress the remains into gem-like beads in your choice of color, and the death beads can be observed in your home. Of course, you can be put into the roots of a planting tree here in America. I've heard of people being shot out on fireworks. I don't know how legal that is. There are green processes, though, that are becoming more preventable. People are opting for environmentally friendly burials. This means skipping the embalming process, which didn't come into vogue until the Civil War, when people tried to preserve the soldiers' bodies so that their parents could look at them one more time. It also nixes the concrete vaults and has woven willow caskets, so you can decompose right into the ground. The Green Burial Council has approved 40 environmentally friendly cemeteries in the U.S. This often happens in Europe, as my own grandmother had something similar. You can have your ashes put in a glass ball, you can have it made into diamonds, or even a memorial reef ball, where it can be put into a sphere and attached to a reef in the ocean to provide habitat for sea life. In the highlands of South Sulawesi, in Indonesia, live the Toragans, who are renowned for their elaborate funerals. These people believe that death is not a sudden process, but more of a gradual journey. The body stays with the family after they have ceased breathing and eating and talking. Body stays with the family after they are done with the breathing and the eating and the talking. But the Toragans see this merely as another form of sickness, and they continue to care for and talk to their loved ones. The funeral is huge and can take place weeks or months later to allow the family to raise the necessary funds and gather everyone together. Only after the funeral is the person's soul thought to move on to the afterlife. The mummified body is then placed in a stone grave or cave, or their coffin is hung from a cliff. Every few years, in a ritual called Manina, held in August, they are exhumed, cleaned, and redressed, which is very, very close to the dead. The Zoroastrians, however, have a complete detest of the death. They see death as defiling everything it touches, even the ground, clothes, people, and even fire. Funeral gets off with a rousing start by having the corpse cleaned in unconsecrated bull urine. Once clean, so-called, corpse is laid in linen and visited twice by a certain dog that can cast away evil spirits. Mourners come to visit the dead, but touching it is strictly forbidden. It's placed on top of a dakma, or tower of silence, where the Zoroastrians remove the clothes using tools. The clothes are later disposed of as they have been defiled. Following this, the body is quickly devoured by vultures. The entire ritual is done in this way to assure minimal amount of harm and injury to the living. You can see how this would prevent disease, and such a belief would grow from that. On the other end of the spectrum, however, you have endocannibalism. Yes, for some cultures, the best way to honor your dead is by eating them. These feasts of the dead are a way to forge a permanent connection between the living and the deceased. It's a cathartic way to express the loathing and fear associated with death and its tragic aftermath. Some anthropologists have suggested that endocannibalism is something the dead would have expected of the living, a fine gesture of goodwill to the tribe and family. Although this is no longer practiced, as far as we know, cultures who engaged in endocannibalism included peoples in Papua New Guinea and Brazil. Now, I think that's just taking it a bit too far. I really could not see myself ever being able to do that. But if that's your bag, I'm sure Hannibal Lecter has some recipes you might enjoy. There are those who take the loss of a loved one very, very seriously. The Dani people of West Papua New Guinea also had to cut off their own fingers. This seems severe and incomprehensible, but any woman related to the deceased, as well as any children, would practice this. It was done to gratify and drive away the spirits, while also providing a way to use physical pain to express their sorrow and suffering. When the amputations were made, fingers were tied with string and then cut off with an axe. The leftover piece was then dried and burned to ashes or stored in a special place. The ritual is now banned in Guinea, but some of the effects of the practice can be seen in older members of the community. If you think they ask a lot of their bereaved, you probably know of the banned practice in India, sati, which was a practice in which the widowed woman set themselves on fire on their husband's funeral pyre. The custom was seen as a voluntary act, but there were many instances in which women were forced, sometimes even dragged against their will, to the fire. No one is certain how the ritual got started, but one suggestion is that it was introduced to prevent wives from killing their wealthy husbands, typically with poison, and marrying their real lovers. Another possibility is that it was seen for a way for a husband and wife to enter into the afterlife together, so that they could thwart opportunistic female angels. Interestingly, India was not the first and only culture to adopt the tradition. Other societies that practiced something similar to sati included Egyptians, Greeks, Goths, and Scythians. But then you take it a step further when you go north to my very own barbaric roots. According to the historic account of Ahmad ibn Fadlan, a 10th century Arab Muslim writer who you may be familiar with if you've read Michael Crichton's Eaters of the Dead or seen the movie made from that book. The rituals following the death of a chieftain were exceptionally brutal. The Viking chieftain's body was put in the grave for 10 days, while new clothes were being prepared for him. During this time, one of his slave girls would volunteer to join him in the afterlife. She was then guarded day and night and given copious amounts of intoxicating drink. Once the cremation ceremonies got started, the girl went from tent to tent to have relations with every man in the village. As the men were having relations, or what we would call rape, they would say, "Tell your master I did this because of my love for him." Following this, the girl was taken to a tent where she was again forced into relations and strangled to death with a rope, and finally stabbed by a village matriarch. And for the coup de grace, the bodies of the chieftain and slave girl were placed aboard a wooden ship that was set alight. The Vikings did this to ensure that the slave girl would serve her master in the afterlife, while the rituals were a way to transfer the chieftain's life force. Well, my dear, that's just a few of the interesting funerary rites around the world. I hope you enjoyed this Folklore Thursday, and it wasn't too creepy for you. So quoth this raven. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and I will comment back. Be sure and ring the little bell so you'll know when these jewels come out. Thank you, my darlings. Bye-bye.